Hi there. Welcome to Bourbon Turntable. This is the show that blends the love of music with the love of whiskey. Tonight, I am bringing you the show that you're not supposed to see. There's a story behind that, as you might imagine, and I'll get into that in just a minute. But first of all, I want to tell you about Bar Cart Co-op. Bar Cart Co-op is a collection of friends who produce content for the whiskey enthusiast. We have shows like Distillers Talk with Alan Bishop and Christy Atkinson. They talk with distillers from across the country and around the world about anything and everything in terms of distillation. Alan also has a couple other shows. One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute is where you can send in your questions to Alan about anything relative to distillation, and he will post video responses to those questions. Alan also has a show called If You Have Ghosts, You Have Everything. On this show, breaks a little bit away from the spirit world, the spirits world, and gets into the spirit world, I guess. So on If You Have Ghosts, You Have Everything, he'll get into anything from spirituality to supernatural. I think they just did a show on Bigfoot, which will be fun to watch. So tune in to If You Have Ghosts, You Have Everything. And Monday nights is a place where you need to tune in. My Whiskey Den, Monday nights, 9 o'clock Eastern, 8 o'clock Central. My Whiskey Den is where craft whiskey is king. Pat and Mitch and Mike, they get together and they'll have samples that they'll taste together. They'll have neat guests on. It's always fun to hang out with the good folks in their chat. Last but certainly not least is Whiskey in My Wedding Ring with David Levine. David is an excellent writer. He has a blog. He has a show where he'll interview distillers and talk with them about their product. He'll do reviews as well. David's a really smart guy, does great work, and he's pretty darn funny too. So be sure to check that out. And of course, our show, Bourbon Turntable. If you're watching us right now over on YouTube, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. We would appreciate it. Or you may be listening on your favorite podcast platform, Apple, Spotify, or Google. Be sure to check us out. Follow us, share. We really do appreciate it. So, started out telling you this is the show that you're not supposed to see. And the reason that you're not supposed to see it is because this wasn't what we had planned for this week. I had interviewed a week ago the lovely and talented Beth Burrows. She is the senior American whiskey ambassador for James B. Beam Distilling Company. And we had a great conversation. Really had a good time with Beth. And then she contacted me the next day and said, "Hey, we talked about some things that I can't talk about yet." So we talked about a few things relative to new releases from Beam that she found out the day after our conversation that those things aren't supposed to be public yet. So we're going to keep it private for now. But in 3 or 4 weeks, we'll air that show. And it was really good. Fantastic conversation with Beth. We got into a lot of wonderful things, both in terms of her and her personal life and just some very transparent conversations about her career. And of course, we talked about Beam. We did a blind tasting of Jim Beam products, which she was brave to be willing to let me submit her to that. But we had a great time and talked about some wonderful music stuff as well. So look forward to seeing that show in a few weeks. But for now, you get the show that you're not supposed to see. So what I want to do is just recap a few things. This was a pretty big week for me in a lot of ways. A week ago yesterday, I'm recording this on a Sunday, on February 17th, drove to St. Louis, met my good buddy Mike Lisac from my Whiskey Den. He came in from Kansas City, so we met in St. Louis. And we went to see a concert together. We've been talking about that for a little while. We've had Jeremiah Johnson and Leilani Kilgore, who were on the bill with the Cold Stairs for that show. So that was fantastic. Got to meet Leilani in person. And I'll just tell you, superstar in the making. get on board with her train right now. She is going places, and man, she's talented. She can sing, she can write, she can play, and just really great stuff. And a sweet, sweet person. So uh, get follow her on social, listen to her stuff. She's got new music coming out later this year too. So just follow that closely. Jeremiah Johnson, he killed it. He did a live version of his song Southern Drawl, and it is really an anthem to being from the South. And uh, he dedicated it to his grandmother. And I tell you what, he just killed it. It was one of those extended live performances where they're just two or three guitar solos mixed in there, and they were all just completely fantastic. So keep your eyes out on Jeremiah. If you get a chance to see him live, definitely take it. And then last but certainly not least, our good friends, the Cold Stairs. They were a whole lot of fun. Always fierce, as I like to say. Um, but Kris and Bryce and Brian, they just bring it every single time they play. And they did a number of songs that are going to be on albums that are coming out in 2024. I believe they'll have an album out mid-year, several singles leading up to that. They'll do another album later in the year. The first album is going to be called The Southern. I think the next album is going to be The Southern Part 2. And somewhere in between, Chris Tapp is doing a solo acoustic album, which that will be very cool as well. So everything I've heard from the new music is really, really great. They just continue to get better and build. Chris as a singer and a songwriter and a guitarist, but also Bryce, this is going to be the second album that he's played on since they added a bass player. And then Brian Mullins, he just continues to just get better and better as a drummer. He's a beast. I mean, yeah, he's not a beast. If you stand next to him, he's not that big a guy, but he plays like a beast. And just really enjoy those guys. They were fantastic. Got to hang out with all those folks a little bit. And something cool happened a few days leading up to the show. I got a message on Facebook from somebody that I didn't know, but he identified himself as the promoter for this show that we were going to in St. Louis, Rustin Smith. And Rustin reached out. He said, "I've seen the shows that you've done with Jeremiah and Leilani." He really appreciated that, and we got to hang out with him a bit, and just really cool guy to meet. We traded some band names and such as well. So hopefully, some of the folks that we've had on our show will get invited to go to St. Louis and play some of the gigs that Rustin puts together. So that should be fun. So that was Saturday night. Saturday afternoon, Mike and I got to hang out a bit with Nick Roady. Nick, if you remember, was on the show last week with Seth Bernheim of Broken Barrel Whiskey. When I was recording the show with Seth and Nick, we were getting ready to start, and Nick mentioned that he lives in St. Louis, and I said, "Hey, well, I'm going to be in St. Louis next week," and it's one of those things that, oh yeah, well, we get together for a drink, and sometimes that just never materializes. But Nick reached out and said, "Hey, when are you going to be here?" And so we went by, and Mike and I got to sample some old. Not that there's that much that's old, not as it's very old, but we got to sample some releases from Broken Barrel that are limited release things that you can't get anymore. And they've been killing it for a while, and I just was slow on the uptake with it because everything I've tried of theirs has just been stellar, and I appreciate the thoughtfulness that goes into their process, as well as just the transparency that they have with it. They don't make any bones about it. They don't try to hide or disguise what they're doing. It's all very transparent. They source most of what they source comes from Green River, which is really good whiskey. And then they're telling you right on the bottle what barrel staves that they're putting in with it. So really great stuff. We had a lot of fun hanging out with him before we went to the show. And before that, let's get into some more whiskey stuff. We went by Stumpy Spirits, and Adam wasn't there. We did get to see his lovely wife and business partner, Laura, and she's always great to talk to. They've got a relatively young child. I think he may be 5 or 6 months old now. So, but she's back in working with the business as well. And they had a big release the weekend before, or 2 weekends before we were there. Rebranding Old Monroe, new bottles shape, new logo, new label. This is the single barrel rye that was part of their special release. Now, this is that fantastic pre-prohibition rye mash bill that Adam had. 72% rye, 25% malted rye, 3% malted barley, and there were some bottles that he released of that several years ago that were just 2 years old, and honestly, it was some of my favorite whiskey of all time. So we got to try this single barrel rye there at the gift shop at the distillery. And I've got a little pour of that right here. And, obviously I've already tried it. Had a little bit this afternoon as well as I was doing some grilling. And it is not just that mash bill. I think it's that the rye itself is 4 or 5 years old, and then it's secondarily aged in Brazilian Amburana cask. And I was a little trepidatious about that because I think Amburana is one of those things that it can get away from a distiller pretty quickly and just really overtake the whiskey itself to where all you're getting is the Amburana. And that's just, I don't like Amburana that much. That's all I want to taste. But this is really well done, deftly handled by Adam and his team, because you get the Amburana influence, but it does not in any way overtake the whiskey itself. On the nose, I get like apple pie filling, the nice, gooey, rich, thick apple pie filling, some warm baking spices like cardamom, nutmeg, cinnamon, and you do get a little bit of that Amburana on the nose as well. Take a nice little sip of it, and Mike kind of nailed a great tasting note with this. I want to make sure I get it right. I've got a note of it here. Well, he said it was like an iced ginger snap cookie, which that's a pretty good fat guy tasting note. And then we were describing it to Mitch, or he was describing it to Mitch Weddle, and Mitch said, "Well, that sounds like a pfeffernuss, which is some sort of European candy, but it is basically made up of those types of baking spices with some powdered sugar on it." And I think that both of those are really good notes. On the finish, you get a little bit more of that oak. The baking spices kind of linger there as well. It's not quite as sweet on the finish as it is on the nose and the palate, But really, really good stuff. And this is at barrel proof 108.6. So you can check that out. If you can get by Stumpy Spirits and go by the Distillery, I imagine at some point they'll start selling some of the new designed whiskeys online as well. Right now, it looks like everything is still the old school traditional Stumpy Spirits bottles. But they've also got a small batch bourbon, which I imagine we'll be talking about that at some point in the near future as well. But really good stuff from Adam and Laura Stumpf. They've got great things going on there. They've just started construction on their new visitor center, so just stay tuned. We'll try to get Adam and Laura on sometime in the near future, and we'll talk about all the good whiskey that they've got coming out, as well as the big events and future things that they have going on. So that was Saturday, and again, I'm just telling you, hey, here's my vacation pictures. But this was Mike and myself. Look at us in our flannel shirts, and yeah, two really good looking guys out on the evening. But yeah, we had a great time. I always enjoy hanging out with Mike. He's a super guy and a great friend, and I'm blessed to call him that. So that was kind of what we did in St. Louis. Then Tuesday was my birthday, and so happy birthday to me. My wife had made reservations for us to go to Bourbons Bistro. Had steak frites for dinner, bread pudding for dessert, and some news from the Bourbons Bistro Buzzard's Roost world as well. Buzzard's Roost now has an American whiskey. Right now, it's only available for purchase. Bottles are only available for purchase at the Buzzard Roost Whiskey Experience. I think pretty soon that'll be available online as well as in distribution points everywhere. So got to try it. It is no shock. It's fantastic stuff. It is some of the whiskey that they've sourced, but they've put it in used barrels, used their own used barrels. And there's a lot of options that they have and how they do that in terms of what the blend of the liquid itself is, which type of barrel they use. So there's a lot of really good options that they have in how they present an American whiskey. Friday night, my little bourbon group, we had what we call Black Wax Night now. It used to be called Booker's Night. But we have, well, you can see in the picture, we've got a bunch of different iterations of Booker's, Little Book, Knob Creek, and Baker's. There was plenty there to enjoy. Let's just say that. And thankfully, everyone survived that. And then last night, the wife and I went to see Blackberry Smoke here in Louisville. So pretty fantastic music, whiskey, and otherwise week for yours truly. I'm very fortunate, very blessed in all of that. So wanted to talk with you a little bit more along a bit of a different line, and just talk about something that's come up in the news in the last week or so um, about that's reflective of the future of whiskey. News came out, a couple of things. This was a report that came out saying that there have been a drop in active distiller permits, and in July there was a first drop in 11 years, meaning the number of active distiller permits on file in July of 2023 compared to July of 2022. So there's actually a drop in July of 2023 over July of 2022 wasn't a huge drop, just 1%. But when you consider the complete boom that whiskey had been on for so long, uh, 11 years without a drop is a pretty big deal. But then that was followed up by 3 more months of a drop year over year, with the last numbers available being October 2023, where it's down 7%. You know, that again, not a huge number, but is it the start of something more ominous? Then news broke, and I'm not trying to be anyone's investment advisor, and this isn't meant to be investment advice at all. But MGP shares fell 15% on soft whiskey demands. So I don't know what soft whiskey is. I don't think I want soft whiskey. That just doesn't sound very good. Kind of like light whiskey. Light whiskey is some of it's good, some of it's not. But soft whiskey, that just sounds terrible. But anyway, no, soft whiskey demand led to the MGP stock decline. MGP insiders sold $19 million worth of MGP shares in the last year. That's, again, not a great sign. So again, are we looking at finally the end of this decade-long bourbon boom? Plus, we're looking at some quite substantial investments out there. Jefferson's is got a $250 million distillery in the works. Blue Run's got $50 million. There's Augusta Distilleries, 23, and then just some huge expansions from the big guys. 1.2 billion from Buffalo Trace, 400 million for Jim Beam. There's a lot of money going into whiskey, and right now there's a lot of bourbon and whiskey that is aging. That maybe the demand is starting to stop, starting to slide, and yeah, if it does, okay, just roll with it. But if I were some of the people that were investing that kind of money in whiskey, distilleries and such, that might be a little bit nervous, a little bit more cautious. But yeah, just anecdotally here around town, some of these larger bourbon groups, they're not going to do single barrel picks anymore because they're sitting on inventories of single barrels that they can't sell. They have members that are, anxious to go out and pick a barrel, any barrel from anywhere, and then they don't move them. So that's a problem. And so single barrels are starting to sit a little bit more. So again, is it the beginning of the end? The end is nigh. No, I'm not, out here talking gloom and doom. Just saying something to keep an eye on, and something to watch. So we'll just see what happens with it. So a few other news items of note. One, our good buddy Kris Koenig over at Golden Beaver. There he is. Hey, Kris. They are releasing another single barrel of their bourbon with obviously with rice as a secondary grain. And that's been pretty big news for Kris and everybody at Golden Beaver. Also big news, they are now available for purchase online. So you can go to goldenbeaverdistillery.com and you can pick up a bottle. You can't get the single barrel there, but you can get their standard offerings, and there's a lot of good stuff to choose from with that. So congratulations to Kris. That's really great news. other news to share with you. Alan Bishop has produced a practical distiller's almanac, and I got my copy in the mail this week. So, uh, very interesting read. Is obvious to everyone. I am not a distiller, but I find the information in this to be pretty fascinating. You can go over to Alchemist Cabinet and website and pick that up. I'll be sure to put a link to that in the show notes, as well as the link to Golden Beaver's Distillery as well. So be sure to check that out. Really excited for that for Alan. Another thing we've got going on. Speaking of Alan, we're doing a bar cart show. Our first bar cart show of 2024 will be about absinthe, and there's a lot of resurgence in terms of absinthe in the last few years. There's still a lot of misunderstanding about absinthe, and I think there are a lot of people that are trying to make claims about their own history with absinthe that aren't necessarily solid. Let's say that. But Alan and Brian Cushing had done a project documenting Switzerland County, Indiana, and the absinthe that had historically been made there. So Alan and Brian, like I said, there's a documentary of that. They've done a recreation of the whole process on how they made the absinthe. It's very authentic. And then so Brian will be on, Alan will be on, and then we'll also have Jim Martin, who's with the Key West Trading Company. He had worked with Alan on Death in the Afternoon, which came out, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago. And Jim will be on to talk about that project, as well as some future absinthe related projects that he's got in the works. So that'll be something fun to check out as well. So that is what I've got for you. I do want to also tell you some of the shows that we've got coming up. I've got Leah Niskanen, and Leah has a company called Barrel Strength Talent. She does tastings, she does education programs. So she's going to be on with us next week, and we'll be tasting some unique whiskeys that she has selected for us to go through. She's going to walk me through a tasting with her, just as if I were at one of her tasting events. After that, we have Sarah Jean Kelly, incredibly talented singer out of Nashville. She just came out with a new single called Whiskey to Water. Get on Spotify, check that out. Sarah Jean Kelly, she's an absolute songbird, and that song is terrific. Then I believe we'll be able to have the aforementioned Beth Burrows show on March 20th. So you'll look forward to getting to see our show with Beth at long last. We've got a band on called Illiterate Light. It is Jeff Gorman and Jake Cochran is a duo. Jeff Gorman is the nephew of our good friend Steve Gorman. That aside, Illiterate Light is they're just killer on their own. I think Steve told me one time, he goes, I told Jeff when he started the band, go out and do something and make something good, and then I'll promote you. Then I'll retweet your posts and such. So Jeff and Jake have built this and built it on their own, and what they have built is a fantastic band. I'm going to go see them live. I think it's in April here in Louisville, and look forward to that because their live stuff, videos I've seen are just outstanding. And they've got a new EP coming out called Slow Down Time. So we'll be talking with them about all of that kind of stuff. They're out of Virginia, so we'll be drinking some Virginia whiskey as well. And then last but certainly not least, April 3rd, we'll have James Gerard of Barrel House Whiskey out of Lexington, Kentucky. We'll have him on to talk about the whiskeys that they're making, the things that they've got going on at Barrel House. It should be a lot of fun as well. So those are some things to look forward to. We do appreciate you tuning in. Again, if you don't mind, subscribe if you're watching us on YouTube, or if you're watching us any podcast platform too. So subscribe there. We would love to have you following us. You can subscribe to our Facebook page as well, where we post all of our shows. You can follow our Facebook group, where we will post the things like what we're drinking and what we're listening to while we're drinking it. So I do appreciate everyone tuning in for this show that you were not supposed to see. And thank you for your time, attention, and patience with me sharing with you my vacation pictures. Hopefully there's a little bit more out of it than that. But nevertheless, I do appreciate everyone for tuning in. And until next time, cheers, love, and free bird. Night.